Hi, I'm G, this is my art channel, and in this video I'm showing you how I painted the center of a peony flower using watercolor markers by Winsor and Newton. And the first thing you can see me doing here is drawing the peony flower out on a 300 GSM piece of watercolor paper, 15 by 15 centimeters. And before I start, here is the reference photo that I'm working from, my own reference photo on the left there, and then a few color tests, a bit of swatching that I did on that right hand side, so I knew which colors I wanted to use. And I decided to start by doing the shadows on the piece first of all. And I know which colors I'm using from the swatch, so I start with a base of this yellow, this cadmium yellow hue, and I'm putting that in just nice and loosely, nothing too fussy. And like I said, I'm working on the shadow areas first of all. So after that, add a bit of yellow ochre on top. Again, not too much, and as you can see, I'm not obliterating the yellow that I've already put on. So I put on a bit more yellow, a little bit less yellow ochre, and then when I switch to the third color that I'm using to sort of really make the shadows work, you can see I'm using a purple here. So I'm using a violet dioxazine, and the thinking behind this is to get a deep, dark kind of brown shadow. I'm blending yellow and purple because yellow and purple together is supposed to give you, a nice brown, a different kind of brown to say using red and green do. So you can see me using a size 3 round sable haired brush here to do the blending in, which seems a bit strange because the sable brush is used to, use a lot of water. It holds a lot of water, so you can get some very washy kind of effect. But here I'm using it with not a lot of actual water loaded in the brush as I use it, just enough to blend the colors. And the reason is because I don't want to add too much water to this, because then what that will do is that will make what's supposed to be a shadow area too pale, too light, too diluted. And usually I use a synthetic brush when I'm working with watercolor markers because I find it's a bit stiffer and a bit springier and better to activate the paint and blend it together. But Winsor and Newton watercolor markers activate so quickly with water and so easily, then you can use a sable one and sort of get away with it. You can use it quite well. And plus, the sable brush has got a very, very pointy tip, which is really good for getting in those really, really small bits and doing a bit of blending, which is quite detailed. So here you can see me adding the yellow again and the yellow ochre in another shadow area, but this time you can see me using a different purple. I'm using a different shade. I'm using mauve or mauve watercolor marker and then blending that in with the yellow and the yellow ochre. And you should be able to see that I'm getting a very different color straight away. A much warmer, but still a brown, but a much warmer brown than when I used the violet dioxazine. And if using a different color halfway through the painting seems like a strange idea, there's a reason for that. I meant to use mauve from the very beginning, but I picked up the wrong one. I picked up violet dioxazine instead of mauve, and you can see the two here side by side. So the top one is using violet dioxazine, and the bottom one is using mauve. Or mauve, and that's the color that I really wanted. I wanted that slightly warmer brown, but I've made a bit of a mistake with that top bit, which is a bit dull using the violet dioxazine. So I need to go back to that later, and I need to find a way to perhaps fix that, lift the paint, and then put on the actual colors that I wanted to use. But in the meantime, I get a bit carried away, and I decide I'm just going to work in a sort of clockwise fashion around the peony center and fill in all of what are the darkest, deepest shadow areas. And my reason for doing that is, first of all, they're small little areas, so I can sort of work my way into the painting without starting with a big area that I might make a big mistake with and get a bit down about it. But also they then let me judge how dark and how light all the other petals in the center need to be, because there's quite a few strong contrasts in this piece of work, from the shadow areas to the really pale petals that are really catching the light at the front. So with most of the shadow areas done, or the darkest shadow areas, I can start working on the lighter petals, the bigger, lighter petals. And for this I'm using exactly the same colors. So I'm using the cadmium yellow hue again, and then I'm going to add some yellow ochre for a little bit of mid-tone on this petal. There you go, you can see that. Just adding a bit of it, not too much. And then I'm going to put in a small amount of the mauve color as well to be my third and my darkest kind of color. And then I start blending in. And I want a lot of light color on these petals in the center and not so much of the dark, shadowy brown that you can see in the background. And I'm starting with a small amount of water on the brush, just like I did with the deeper, darker shadows. So I'm just activating the colours first of all. But right next to me off camera, I've got a pot of water, and I've also got a wadded bit of tissue paper as well. So if I feel as though the colours are too strong, I can take the brush, I can dip it in the water, get a bit more water on the brush, bring it back, pop it in, and just sort of try and blend and run those colours together, which is what you just saw me doing. Took the brush out of shot, put some water on it, brought it back on, and then I'm blending the yellow and the yellow ochre and the mauve together, and I'm trying to get them to flood together a little bit and get a nice soft kind of, slightly more soft, diffuse kind of shadow on the petal that I'm painting right now. As with any water-based medium, it's always a bit of a balance. How much water to use, how much to add. Use too much, it gets flooded. Use too little, and you start getting smears and streaks and drying lines in your work. I start with a little, with the option to add more, because it's right there and I can whack it in while everything's still damp, and hopefully it can still blend, it can still make it work. Now, down at the bottom here, I have two petals that kind of link together, join together, but I haven't got all of the colour on to do that. So what you can see me doing is sort of pulling that shadow out a little bit, adding a bit of water now, and blending that in with the shadow, sort of blending the colour and the water together. And then I'm going to go back and get a bit more water, and I'm going to blend it some more. So what I'm hoping to do is make that kind of shadow bit fade out from dark to light into sort of nothingness, so that then I can leave it and I can add some more colour on top of it later, and it will almost be a seamless join between these two petals, rather than if I just let it sort of stop and there was a really strong drying line. So you can see here I lay colour down on top of that bit that I've just done, and then I add the water to it and I just blend that colour in on top, and there's no drying line, it just sort of hopefully seamlessly blends together. So you can see me now working using exactly the same technique, but working on some of the petals that are a bit paler. So you can see me upping the yellow here, using a little bit less yellow ochre, and in a lot of places a lot less of the mauve colour as well, so that I'm getting a much lighter effect to these petals. I'm also dropping in quite a lot of just fresh water right in the middle, and then blending back into the shadows. And this is all designed to give me depth in the picture, so areas that are light, areas that are dark, so hopefully some are coming towards you and some are further away. And at this point I was pretty much ready to quit for this particular day, and when I sat back and looked at it, I really wasn't pleased with what I'd done. It just didn't feel right. So, I went away and left it feeling really unfulfilled. But the next day when I came back, sat down and looked at it, I was absolutely happy with it, and I thought, this looks great. What was I worried about yesterday? And that's a lesson to sometimes quit on your piece of work, leave it, go off, do something else, and come back the next day. And often you can feel really different about a piece of work that the day before you were thinking was trash and you were going to chuck in the bin. You can see it in a different light, much more relaxed, a bit more detached. Is it subjective? I don't know if that's the right word. But you can just go, yeah, okay, that's actually fine. And you can continue. And that'll stop you from throwing a lot of stuff in the bin, taking a bit of a break. So hopefully on this second day you can start to see some of the depth that I'm trying to achieve coming through, being successful. So you can see those lighter petals that hopefully look as though they're popping out more towards you, and then those darker petals that are in the background underneath the pink petals that are surrounding this piece. And that's one of the reasons why I chose this picture to do, because you have these very golden ochre kind of petals in the center that haven't quite popped out and grown yet, and surrounding that are these really bright pink petals that I'm going to probably paint last. So I really love the two colors, the contrasting colors, and also the chance to get in there and do some sort of yellow and yellow ochre, since it's one of my favorite watercolor colors in the first place. What you might have seen me doing a little bit of here as well is layering colours. I'll put on a lightish kind of wash of kind of yellow ochre bits, and then there's a few little details that need to be sort of put into the petal. So I'm going back with the yellow ochre, popping a little bit of yellow ochre on top, really small amount, and then just getting a sort of slightly wet brush in there and blending them, so you can see some folds and some creases within the petals that weren't there to begin with. And I just thought that using layering to do that was going to be an easier way than try and put in all the colours in the first place in one go, in one pass, and try and do it all in one go. And as I get into some of these smaller, much more detailed areas in the bottom part of the picture, I'm glad I'm working on 15 by 15 centimeter square instead of 12 by 12, which is what I normally work on, because that would just be way too small to get some of those tiny little detail petals that are near the bottom, done right and to do them justice. And you've also just seen me do 3 smaller sort of reddish purpley petals down at the very bottom in the middle there. And I used Quinacridone Magenta and Cadmium Deep Red Hue to do those 2. And that's 2 colours I'm going to be using later on as well. So I'll list those as a label at the bottom of the picture so you can see exactly how those tricky ones are spelt. But that's what I used to do those 3. And you can also see me just doing some darkening of some shadow areas at this point as well and tidying up some little bits. And it's almost finished. And with the center almost finished, there's one little bit that I can't keep putting off. So this is the fixing mistakes bit. Remember that bit that I did with the violet dioxazine? Yes, I think I need to do something about that. So what I decided to use here is a synthetic size 4 round brush. So like I said earlier, a slightly stiffer, springier kind of brush, quite a bit of water on it, because what I'm trying to do is lift the color that I've already put on. So I'm putting the water on and I'm working it over the paint with the brush, and then what I'm going to do is get some dry tissue paper in hand, and I'm going to use that to blot the color that's already there. So hopefully what I'm doing is lifting off some of that color, making it not so bright, not so dark, so that I can then work on top of it. It's not going to get all of the color out, because these kind of colors, once you've activated them, once you've used the water, they do stain the paper a little bit, but it's lifted it up, made it a bit paler. So now I'm going to go back in with my original 3 colors, my yellow ochre, and my mauve color as well. And hopefully, because those colors are already there, and this is a shadowy bit in the background, when I then decide to use the paint, and you can see I've flipped back to using the sable size 3 brush here, it's going to be okay, and you won't really, hopefully, be able to tell that I did anything there with a different color right at the beginning. Needless to say, if you're going to blot anything in your own work, make sure your paper is nice and thick, because it can roughen up and make the paper bubble if you're not too careful. So here you go, here's the center and the center that I painted side by side with the reference photo, so you can compare a little bit. And now I'm going to do the petals. So I need to clean my water, get rid of all that browny water, and start with some nice, clean, clear water. So now you can see me working on the bigger petals in the background. You'll see I'm much more loose and kind of rough with the strokes of the paint that I'm putting on with the markers. So I'm using Quinacridone Magenta there first of all. And then once I've got my base of Quinacridone Magenta, I can then add on top of that some of my Mauve. So there's going to be a link between the petals in the pink petals and also the browny yellow petals in the center, because I'm using Mauve as a shadow on both of them. And then you see me using Cadmium Deep Red Hue as well, because these petals are pink. If you've seen the reference photo, you've seen how bright pink they are. And I did some color tests on this first of all, and I found that these 3 colors together gave me a really nice kind of purpley pink color, which is what I wanted for these petals that surround those warmer brown and yellow petals in the center. So I have done some color swatches on this, but I've got to say straight off the bat, right up, that when I did blend these 3 colors together, even though I had the red in there, which was hopefully going to, bring the pink to the fore, it didn't quite go as pink as I wanted it to. I mean, you'll see as the picture develops and you see each of the petals getting done, I just didn't seem to be able to get the right balance of those 3 colors together in order to get the bright pink of these petals in the background. But I sort of persevered and I just kept going, and I thought, well, add more water, will that make them paler? No, it was just like a pale purple instead of a pale pink. But at this point, I was happy with the colour that I was getting. Yes, it wasn't a pink, and I was a bit annoyed about that, but I could make my peace with the kind of purple colour that I was getting instead. So I thought, okay, well, I'll stick with that, and I'll make a few little tweaks and adjustments as I go along, using a bit more red, using a little bit less mauve, in order to hopefully get a bit more of the kind of pink colour that's in the reference photo. But here you can see me blending all 3 colours together using, again, a synthetic brush, because it's a slightly bigger petal that I'm working on. I want to get the water in there and really blend those colours around. And then what you can see me doing is working the brush through the paint that I've done with sort of strokes, diagonal strokes down, to look like, hopefully, some of the veins that are on the petal in the reference photo. And I do that with the paint that's already mixed on the brush. I can't use water because if I try putting water strokes in, that water will push the colour apart and have too strong a kind of effect. And that's not what I'm looking for. So here I am with my second petal. So I'm putting on the Quinacridone Magenta, a lot less mauve, and a big fat sweep of the Cadmium deep red hue. And then I'm blending these guys together as well. Again, using a synthetic brush. And I'm just trying to make them be darker near that top bit where I've put most of the colour and get gradually lighter towards the bottom of this petal, because that's what it looked like in the reference photo. The light was clearly hitting the bottom edge and the top edge was dark. So I put in a big swatch of clean water and then I'm using the brush and just moving that up, blending that up into the top bit where the colour is. And because I've got a pinky purple colour that I'm reasonably happy with, you see me now doing all the smaller petals around the edge, around the outside edge, and leaving the bigger pink petals till last. I'm a little bit worried that I might get some issues with those, which is why I'm leaving them till last. And that's because there's always a risk that the markers might stain the paper, and over a larger area, when that colour's going to get blended out and spread over a larger area, then if they do stain the paper, it's going to be a bit more difficult for me to hide. So here you can see me doing the one big top petal, and I put on my same three colours, and I'm using a much bigger size 8 round synthetic brush to blend in everything there, and dropping in quite a lot of clear water along the edge, the bottom edge, so that it spreads upwards and bleeds into the colour to give me a lovely highlighted edge. And I do that on the edge of all of the darker petals, but obviously the top ones because they're catching a lot of light. So here you can see me doing the last big petal, getting a lot of water along the edge and also even a bit of blotting. And then I darken up some of the interior petals that weren't dark enough when I compared them. Now, you know that staining I'm talking about? I'm pointing that out right there. On that top petal, the magenta marker has stained the paper, so when I then blended in the colour, you can see it underneath. So what I have to do is go back in, put another layer of colour on that top bit, and then blend it in again. So what I'm trying to do is almost camouflage and hide where the stain is with some new colour. So it's done, and here are the two side by side, so you can really see how much I failed at getting a pink right. Let me know in the comments below what you thought. Is the pink purple a real deal breaker for you? How did you like the really close cropped up image? And please don't forget to subscribe, like and share. And if you enjoyed this watercolor marker video, then why don't you check out some of the other ones that I've done, like this last one on begonia, and I will post the links to all of those below. Thanks for watching.